Hello students, in our last video we had done Economics chapter 1 class 9 and Geography chapter 1 of class 9. Now today we will do History chapter 1 part 1 of class 9, the French Revolution. So here we start right on. The first paragraph. On the morning of 14 July 1789, the city of Paris was in a state of alarm. The king had commanded troops to move into the city. So the king had ordered the troops to enter the city. Rumors spread that he would soon order the army to open fire upon the citizens. So there was a big rumor that the king would order his army to open fire upon the common citizens. Okay. Some 7,000 men and women gathered in front of the town hall and decided to form a people's militia. Militia means army. Okay, 7,000 men and women gathered in front of the town hall and they took the decision that they would form a people's army. So they broke into a number of government buildings in search of arms. They began to search arms and ammunitions. Okay, now come to the second paragraph. Finally, a group of several hundred people marched towards the eastern part of the city and stormed the fortress prison. So there was a big prison, the Bastille. Bastille means prison or jail. Okay, where they hoped to find hoarded ammunition. Ammunition means weapons. Okay, hoarded means which was gathered in large amount. Okay, so they stormed into the Bastille, the fortress prison, where they thought that they would find some hidden ammunition which may have been stored in huge quantity by the king and the army. So in the armed fight that followed, the commander of the Bastille was killed. Okay, so the commander of the prison was killed and the prisoners released. Though there were only 7 of them, there were only 7 prisoners. Okay, yet the Bastille was hated by all. Everyone hated the jail because it stood for the despotic power of the king. Despotic means absolute power, because the king had absolute power in France. Okay, the fortress was demolished, it was broken down, and its stone fragments were sold in markets. Clear? So its stone fragments were sold in the markets to all those who wished to keep a souvenir of its destructions. Souvenir means something kept as a memory. So it was sold in the market to those people who wish to keep them as souvenirs. Okay, now come to the next paragraph. The days that followed saw more rioting both in Paris and the countryside. Most people were protesting against the high price of bread, because at that time the price of eatables, that is bread etc., was very high. There was a food scarcity. Much later, when historians looked back upon this time, they saw it as the beginning of a chain of events that ultimately led to the execution of the king in France. Execution means he was killed. So they saw it as a beginning of a chain of events. There were many events that followed. So it was just the beginning of the chain of events that ultimately led to the execution of the king of France. Though most people at the time did not anticipate. Anticipate means to know beforehand. Okay. So though most people at the time did not anticipate this outcome, no one thought that this would happen, but it actually happened. Now come to the next page. French society during the late 18th century. Okay. Now please pay attention. So, in 1774, Louis XVI of the Bourbon family. Bourbon family means European. Bourbon is a European dynasty of French origin. Okay. So Louis XVI was the king. Louis XVI was born in a Bourbon family of kings, ascended the throne of France. So he ascended the throne. He was 20 years old and married to the Austrian princess Mary Antoinette. Upon his accession, the new king found an empty treasury. He found that the treasury was empty. There was scarcity of money. Okay, long years of war had drained the financial resources of France. So previously there was long years of war, and there was financial crisis. Okay, added to this was the cost of maintaining an extravagant means lavish. Okay, extravagant court at the immense palace of Versailles. So long years of war had already drained France financially. The financial resources was drained, and in addition to this, there was a high cost of maintaining a very lavish court in the immense palace of Versailles. Under Louis XVI, France helped the 13 American colonies to gain their independence from the common enemy Britain. So under Louis XVI, France helped the 13 American colonies to gain independence, and France had lost a huge amount of money, resources. The war added more than $1 billion to a debt that had already risen to more than 2 billion livres. Already it was 2 billion livres. It added more 1 billion livre to a debt. Now lenders who gave credit now began to charge more interest, 10% interest on loans. So the French government was obliged to spend an increasing percentage of its budget to interest payments alone, to meet its regular expenses such as cost of maintaining an army, the court, running government offices or universities. The state was forced to increase taxes. Okay. Now there was no way that the government could earn money. So the king had no way except to increase taxes. Okay, to meet its regular expenses such as cost of maintaining an army, the court, running government offices or universities, the state was forced to increase taxes. Yet even this measure would not have sufficed. Yet this measure itself was not sufficient. So at that time, French society in the 18th century was divided into 3 estates, and only members of the third estate paid taxes. So this is a very important question. You can note down in your copy that only the third estate had to pay taxes. Now, earlier in this page, this part, you can note down in your copy the financial crisis situation in France, which started as soon as Louis XVI ascended the throne, and the decision he had to take was to increase taxes. Okay, and the second question important in this paragraph is the third estate had to pay taxes. So at this time, the French society in the 18th century was divided into 3 estates. Okay, and only the third estate had to pay taxes. The society of estates, next para. The society of estates was part of the feudal system. Now what is feudal system? Feudal system was a combination of some legal or economic and military and cultural customs that was prevalent in Europe at that time. It is a special system called feudal system. So society of estates was part of the feudal system that dated back to the Middle Ages. It was prevalent in the Middle Ages. Okay, the term old regime, this is a very important question. The term old regime is usually used to describe the society and institutions of France before 1789. So what is old regime? If there is a question, you can add this answer. Okay, now come to the next paragraph. Now figure 2 shows how the system of estates in French society, figure 2 is this one, right side of this page. Okay, the figure 2 shows how the system of estates in French society was organized. Peasants made up about 90% of the population. Peasants means farmers. Okay, peasants means farmers. Peasants made up about 90% of the population. However, only a small number of them owned land that they cultivated. Okay, about 60% of the land was owned by nobles, the church and other richer members of the third estate. The members of the first 2 estates, that is the clergy and the nobility, enjoyed certain privileges. Now clergy means group of persons invested with special functions in church. Okay, those people had special functions in church. They are called clergy, and that is clergy and the nobility enjoyed certain privileges by birth. They had certain birth rights. The most important of those was exemption from paying taxes to the state. So they did not have to pay taxes to the state, to the king. The nobles further enjoyed feudal privileges. I told you earlier what is feudal privileges. Okay, so the nobles enjoyed these feudal privileges. These included feudal dues, which they extracted from the peasants. They used to take taxes from farmers. Okay, the nobles. Peasants were obliged to render services to the lord, to work in his house and fields, to serve in the army, or to participate in building roads. So the peasants were very happy to provide them service. Okay. Now the last paragraph. The charge too extracted its share of taxes called tithes. Tithes is a tax levied by the church, comprising about 1/10 of the agricultural produce. Okay, so it is a kind of tax. The church extracted this tax from the peasants, and finally, all members of the third estate had to pay taxes to the state. These included a direct tax called taille. Taille means a tax paid directly to the state, to the king. And also, not only this, also a number of indirect taxes. Okay, the members of the third estate had to pay these taxes, which were levied on articles of everyday. This taille was levied on articles of everyday consumption, that is salt and tobacco, which were used regularly by the people. The burden of financing activities of the state through taxes was borne by the third estate alone. Now the third estate had to pay the full tax. Now come to the next page. The struggle to survive. The population of France rose from 23 million in 1715 to 28 million in 1789. So I had told you previously the old regime. The old regime was called, which was called the time before 1789. Okay. So the population of France rose from 23 million to 28 million in 1789. This led to a rapid increase in the demand for food grains. So there was a shortage or scarcity of food grains. Production of grains could not keep pace with the demand. So the demand was high, but the production was low. Clear? So the price of bread, which was staple diet of the majority, rose rapidly. In the first page we had already read that the price of bread was very high. So the price of bread was very high, and it was out of reach of the common people. Most workers were employed as laborers in workshops, whose owner fixed their wages, but wages did not keep pace with the rise in prices. The price rise was very high, but the wages were low. So the gap between the poor and rich widened. Things became worse whenever drought or hail reduced the harvest. Whenever there was a natural calamity, the situation became worse. So this led to a subsistence crisis. So what is subsistence crisis? It is given here on the right side. Subsistence crisis is an extreme situation where the basic means of livelihood are endangered. So the basic amenities in life, which are required in everyday use, food, shelter, clothing, people were not able to afford this because of severe price rise, and that occurred frequently in France during the old regime. Okay, come to the next page. A growing middle class envisages an end to privileges. Okay, now listen carefully. In the past, peasants and workers had participated. Let me select it. See the first paragraph. In the past, peasants and workers had participated in revolts against increasing taxes and food scarcity. There was revolts in the previous times, but they lacked the means and programs to carry out full-scale measures that would bring about a change in the social and economic order. So they did not have proper means to organize those revolts properly. So this responsibility now came upon the third estate, because they had become prosperous and had access to education. They were educated people, the members of third estate. They were not poor people. Okay. Now come to the next paragraph. The 18th century witnessed the emergence of social groups termed as middle class. So in this time, there was a new social group called middle class, who earned their wealth through an expanding overseas trade and from the manufacture of goods such as woolen and silk textiles that were either exported or brought by the richer members of society. So they were involved in business activities, and they earned a lot of money, the members of third estate. Okay. In addition to merchants, so these people, this was the beginning of a new social group called middle class. In addition to merchants and manufacturers, the third estate included professions such as lawyers or administrative officials. All of these were educated and believed that no group in society should be privileged by birth. So this is a very important question you can write down. Who were the members of the third estate? Okay, there were merchants, manufacturers, professionals such as lawyers and administrative officials, and all of them were educated, and they believed that these privileges should not be continued by as a right by birth. Next, rather a person's social position must depend on his merit. So they believe that a person's social position must depend solely upon his merit, not by birth. So these ideas, envisaging a society based on freedom and equal laws and opportunities for all, were put forward by philosophers such as John Locke and Jacques Rossi. So there were some philosophers, okay, they were learned people, and these theories were put forward by them. Their names are John Locke, very important part, you can note down in your copy as a very important question, okay. So who were the philosophers who put forward these revolutionary ideas or new ideas? Okay, they were John Locke and Jacques Rossi. In his two treatises of government, Locke sought to refute. Refute means to prove something incorrect or wrong. So Locke sought to refute the doctrine of divide and absolute right of the monarch. So he thought that he would prove that it is incorrect or it is wrong thought that the monarch should have the absolute power. Okay. Rossi carried the idea forward, proposing a form of government based on a social contract between people and their representatives. Very important answer, you can note down in your copy. The idea which was put forward by Rossi. So he put forward a proposition that the form of government should be based on a social contract between the people and their representatives. In the spirit of laws, Montesquieu proposed, very important answer, the theory put forward by Montesquieu, okay. In the spirit of laws, Montesquieu proposed a division of power within the government between the legislative, executive and the judiciary. So this is a new model. In that time this model was new. So that model of government was put in force in the USA after the 13 colonies declared their independence from Britain. The American Constitution also and its guarantee of individual rights was an important example of political thinkers in France. So these new theories, these new ideas, actually at that time it was a very revolutionary idea, okay. This new form of government, the division of power between the legislative, the executive and the judiciary, at that time this was a new model. So this model was put in force in the USA. The American Constitution and its guarantee of individual rights also was an important example for political thinkers in France. Clear? So all were very motivated by these new theories, by these new views. Okay. Next para. The ideas of these philosophers were discussed intensively in saloons and coffee houses and spread among people through books and newspapers. So all were enlightened by reading this, by knowing these new theories. Clear? These were frequently read aloud in groups for the benefit of those who could not read and write. The news that Louis XVI planned to impose further taxes to be able to meet the expenses of the state generated anger and protest against the system of privileges. So when the people came to know that Louis XVI was planning to impose further taxes, the people were very angry, okay, and they protested against the system of privileges that were enjoyed by certain groups of people in those times. So this is the end of part 1 of chapter 1. In my next video we will do part 2 of this chapter. Thank you, students.